Nobody approached Adaeze Okonkwo at the gala. She was a stranger in Busan. No connections, no alliances, no reason for anyone to notice her. But a little girl noticed her. 6 years old, dressed like a small queen, eyes carrying something far too heavy for a child. She crossed the entire room, looked up at Adaeze, and whispered, "Can I sit with you?" In 30 minutes, that little girl would hand Adaeze a secret so dangerous it would send her straight into the heart of Busan's most feared crime family estate. Adaeze Okonkwo had not come to Busan to collect problems. She had come to collect money. Specifically, she had come to close 3 business deals: gemstones, fabric, accessories, the kind of inventory that made women feel powerful and look expensive. She was good at her job. She was better at minding her business. And she had every intention of leaving Busan exactly the way she arrived: unbothered, profitable, and drama-free. The gala had not even been part of her original plan. Her business partner, Chimaka, had called that afternoon sounding like she'd won a lottery. An invitation had come through one of their Busan contacts, a high-profile evening, the kind of event where the right handshake opened doors that emails never could. Adaeze had stood by her hotel window, staring at the bay for a full minute before saying yes. She packed her deep burgundy dress, structured shoulders, floor length, the kind of dress that did the talking before she opened her mouth, and showed up. The venue was extraordinary in that quiet, intimidating way that truly expensive places always were. Chandeliers that caught the light like frozen waterfalls. Men in suits that had never seen a sale rack. Conversations happening in 3 languages simultaneously. Adaeze had been in rooms like this before. She was not impressed. She was also not particularly comfortable. She knew nobody. Nobody knew her. And the canapes were frankly disappointing. She found herself a corner, her natural habitat at events like this. She accepted a drink from a passing server and settled in to observe. People watching was a free hobby, and Adaeze was very good at it. That was when she saw him. Park Jae-won stood near the center of the room like a man who had never once in his life wondered whether he belonged somewhere. He wasn't the loudest person at the gala. He didn't need to be. People simply arranged themselves around him without seeming to realize they were doing it. Tall, composed, dark charcoal suit, a face that revealed absolutely nothing. Not unkind, exactly. More like a door with no handle. Beside him stood a woman, beautiful in that high-maintenance way, hand resting on his arm, laughing at the right moments, leaning into him with a practiced ease that looked almost real. Adaeze clocked them both, filed them under "not my business," and moved on. What caught her eye next was sitting alone at a small table near the edge of the room. A little girl. Couldn't have been more than 6. White dress with tiny gold buttons. Adaeze's trained eye registered the craftsmanship immediately. That was not a department store dress. The child's legs dangled above the floor, and she was surveying the room with the calm, unimpressed expression of someone who had seen far too much for her age. Adaeze watched her for a moment. Nobody was watching the child back. Not the bodyguards positioned around the room. Not the woman on Park's arm. Not Park himself, who was deep in conversation with 2 older men. Then the little girl turned her head and looked directly at Adaeze. It was the kind of look that shouldn't come from a 6-year-old. Steady, measuring, like she was making a decision. Adaeze held the gaze. She wasn't sure why, and after a long moment, the child looked away first. Adaeze went back to her drink. She was mid-sip when she felt it. A small, deliberate tug on the fabric of her dress. She looked down. The little girl was standing beside her, hands folded neatly in front of her. She had crossed the entire gala floor, past bodyguards, past her father's associates, past every important person in that room, and stopped here, right next to Adaeze Okonkwo, a woman she had never met in her life. She looked up and whispered, "Can I sit with you?" "Where are your parents?" Adaeze asked, keeping her voice even. The little girl glanced briefly toward Park Jae-won across the room, then back at Adaeze. "My father is busy." Adaeze looked around, waiting for someone to come rushing over. Nobody moved. Nobody was even looking their way. She pulled out the chair beside her. "Sit." The little girl sat down and smoothed her dress over her knees with the composure of a much older person. Then she studied Adaeze's face with open curiosity. You're not Korean, she said. Very observant, Adaeze said. I'm not. You came alone. Also correct. You're not scared of anything in this room. Adaeze tilted her head. What makes you say that? Because everyone else is, the girl said simply. But you're just standing in your corner drinking your drink like this is a normal party. Adaeze laughed, as it came out warm and genuine and slightly too loud for their quiet corner. She didn't mind. And what's your name, little observer? Nari. A small pause. Nari Park. Adaeze Okonkwo had not come to Busan to collect problems. But something about the way this child said her name, like it carried weight she hadn't asked for, made Adaeze set her drink down and give Nari her full attention. For a few minutes they sat in surprisingly comfortable silence. Adaeze watched the room. Nari watched her father across the gala floor, that composed, unreachable man with an expression Adaeze couldn't quite name. Not quite longing, something more complicated. Is that your father? Adaeze asked quietly. Yes. He looks important. He is. A pause. That's the problem. Adaeze glanced at her. What do you mean? Nari didn't answer immediately. She watched the woman beside her father refill his glass from a private bottle she had brought to their table. She watched the woman smile up at Park as he accepted it. Nari's small hands tightened slightly in her lap. Then she turned to Adaeze. Can I tell you something? You can tell me whatever you want, Adaeze said carefully. Nari looked at her with those two old eyes and said, in a voice so quiet that Adaeze had to lean in to catch it, the woman standing next to my father, she puts something in his tea every morning. I've seen her 3 times. The noise of the gala continued around them, glasses clinking, laughter rising and falling, music drifting from somewhere Adaeze couldn't see. And in their quiet corner, a 6-year-old had just handed her something that felt like a live wire. Have you told your father? Adaeze asked, keeping her voice steady. Nari shook her head. He won't believe me. He never believes me about her. She's very good at smiling. She said it without bitterness, just fact, the kind of fact a child accepts when she has already tried and failed. I just wanted someone to know, Nari said, so that when something bad happens to him someday, at least one person knew it was coming. Adaeze stared at this child, 6 years old, carrying this alone, not asking to be rescued, not asking for anything at all, just needing to put the weight down somewhere, even briefly, even with a stranger she would never see again. Before Adaeze could respond, Nari stood up, smoothed her dress again, and said, Thank you for letting me sit with you. Then she walked back across the gala floor, sat down at her small table, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at nothing, like the conversation had never happened. Adaeze picked up her drink, put it back down, picked it up again. She looked at Park Jae-won across the room, accepting another drink from the woman beside him, laughing at something one of his associates said, completely unaware. She looked at Nari, sitting alone, watching her father with those quiet, helpless eyes. Adaeze Okonkwo had come to Busan to mind her business. She stared into her glass for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone and called Chiamaka. Chiamaka, she said when her friend picked up, how do you feel about me making a slight detour before we fly home? What kind of detour? Chiamaka asked slowly. I need to find out how someone applies to work as a housekeeper. Dead silence. Adaeze? Yes, Adaeze Okonkwo, who owns a gemstone business. The very same. You want to apply as domestic staff? Yes. Have you been drinking? Barely. Adaeze, I am going to need you to walk away from whatever conversation or person or situation has led you to this moment right now. Because we did not build this business from the ground up so that you could go and scrub somebody's floors in Busan. Nobody said anything about scrubbing floors. That is literally what housekeepers do. Chiamaka, will you lower your voice? I will not lower my voice. Adaeze held the phone away from her ear and watched Park Jae-won's fiancé refill his glass again with that practiced, beautiful smile. I'll explain everything tomorrow. Just look up domestic staffing agencies in Busan tonight. I hate you, Chiamaka said. You love me. I genuinely do not right now. Good night, Chiamaka. She hung up, looked one last time at Nari, sitting small and alone at her table across the room. The child didn't look back, She had said what she needed to say. She had moved on. But Adaeze Okonkwo had not. The domestic staffing agency Chiamaka found, under extreme protest and with a running commentary of grievances that lasted 45 minutes, was called Hyundai Premium Household Services. They specialized in placing high-caliber domestic staff in the homes of Busan's elite. Discreet, professional, thorough background checks. Adaeze sat across from the agency coordinator the next morning in a neat office in the city center and answered every question with the calm confidence of a woman who had negotiated with difficult people in difficult rooms her entire adult life. She had done her homework the night before. She knew what to say, how to present herself, how to make her international background sound like an asset rather than a complication. The coordinator looked at her application, looked at Adaeze, looked at the application again. "Wes, you have no prior domestic experience," she said. "I am an extremely fast learner," Adaeze said pleasantly. "The household you are being considered for has very specific requirements. The employer is—" The coordinator paused, choosing her words. "Particular." "I work well with particular people," Adaeze said. "In fact, I prefer them." The coordinator studied her for another long moment. Adaeze smiled back with the patience of someone who had closed deals with people who didn't want to be closed. 3 days later, she got the call. She had been placed at the Park Estate. She called Chiamaka immediately. "I got it," she said. Silence, then, "Adaeze, I need you to know that I am your best friend, and I love you, and I am also genuinely considering reporting you missing because clearly you have been kidnapped and replaced with a different person. Chiamaka, do you know whose house that is?" "I have an idea." "An idea, Adaeze? That man is not a regular person. That is not a regular house. You cannot just go in there with your chest and your strategy like you're closing a gemstone deal." "Watch me," Adaeze said. Another silence. Longer this time. "If you die," Chiamaka said finally, "I'm keeping the business." "Fair enough," Adaeze said. The Park Estate was exactly what Adaeze had expected, and still somehow more than she was prepared for. Gates that took 30 seconds to drive through. Gardens that looked like they had their own staff. A main house that communicated power without trying. Clean lines, understated luxury. The kind of architecture that said old money even when the money wasn't old at all. Adaeze arrived with 3 other new staff members, was shown to the domestic quarters, given her uniform, a neat navy ensemble that she mentally noted was actually well cut, and briefed by the head housekeeper, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Yoon, who spoke in clipped sentences and looked like she had never smiled voluntarily in her life. "You will learn the household schedule in the first week," Mrs. Yoon said, walking briskly through the corridors with Adaeze keeping pace beside her. "You will not speak unless spoken to by members of the household. You will not make eye contact with Mr. Park unless he addresses you directly. You will not—" "Mrs. Yoon," a small voice. They both turned. Nari Park was standing in the corridor in her school uniform, backpack on, apparently just arrived home. She was looking at Adaeze with an expression that gave absolutely nothing away. Not surprise, not recognition, nothing. Adaeze looked back at her with equal blankness. "Miss Nari," Mrs. Yoon said, her entire manner shifting into something approaching warmth. "You're home early." "Practice was canceled." Nari was still looking at Adaeze. "Is this new staff?" "Yes, this is Adaeze. She joined us today." Nari looked at Adaeze for one more careful second, and then she looked away. "Okay," she said simply, and walked down the corridor toward the staircase. Adaeze watched her go. Just before Nari reached the stairs, she turned her head slightly, not enough for Mrs. Yoon to notice, and her eyes found Adaze's one more time, a brief, deliberate look. Then she was gone. Message received, Adaeze thought. We don't know each other. Got it. The first week at the Park Estate taught Adaeze 3 things. The first was that Park Jae-won ran his household the same way he presumably ran everything else, with quiet, absolute authority. He was rarely seen but always felt. When he walked through a room, the temperature seemed to change slightly. Staff straightened without being told to. Conversations paused. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. And the second thing Adaeze learned was that the fiancé, whose name was Yeon-soo, was very, very good at being liked. She was warm with the staff, generous with compliments, laughed easily and often. Adaeze watched her the way she watched difficult business partners. Pleasant expression, absolutely no relaxation of attention whatsoever. She noticed that Yeonsu's warmth never quite reached her eyes when she thought nobody was looking. She noticed how carefully Yeonsu managed Park's schedule, his meals, his tea, always his tea. The third thing Adaeze learned was that Nari Park, for a 6-year-old, had extraordinary self-control. They passed each other multiple times a day, in corridors, at meals, in the garden. Nari never acknowledged her beyond what was normal for a child interacting with household staff. No lingering looks, no secret smiles, nothing that would draw attention. But one afternoon, Adaeze was restocking the library, a room she had specifically requested to be assigned to because it had a clear sight line to the main sitting room where Park took his afternoon tea. When she felt a small presence beside her, she didn't look down. She continued arranging books. "There's a loose stone behind the East Garden planter," Nari said quietly, her voice completely conversational, as though she were commenting on the weather. "If something needs to be kept somewhere safe." Then she walked out of the library. Adaeze stared at the bookshelf for a moment. Then she allowed herself a very small smile. She had once thought that this child was just a scared little girl carrying too heavy a secret. She was beginning to understand that Nari Park was considerably more than that. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Adaeze was moving through the main corridor carrying fresh linens when she turned a corner and walked directly into him. Not metaphorically, physically. The linens went one way, her balance went the other, and she would have hit the floor entirely if a hand hadn't caught her arm with a speed that was frankly startling for a man standing still a second ago. She found herself upright, arm held, face approximately 30 centimeters from Park Jae-won's. Up close, he was more human than he appeared from across Gala floors. There was a tiredness around his eyes that the composed expression tried to hide. He looked at her with something that wasn't quite surprise, more like mild recalibration. "I apologize," Adaeze said immediately, stepping back, reaching for the fallen linens. "I wasn't looking where I was going." "Neither was I," he said. His voice was lower than she expected. She kept her eyes on the linens, in her expression professionally neutral. She was excruciatingly aware that she was supposed to be invisible. "You're new," he said. Not a question. "Yes, sir. 2 weeks." A pause. "You're not Korean." Adaeze almost smiled. His daughter had said the exact same thing. "No, sir. I'm not." He said nothing further. She gathered the last of the linens, gave a small professional nod, and continued down the corridor. She did not look back, but she had felt him watching her until she turned the corner. In her room that night, she called Chiamaka. "I bumped into him today," she said. "Into who?" Oh no, Adaeze." Nothing happened. It was 30 seconds. A pause. "And?" Adaeze was quiet for a moment. He caught me before I fell." Chimaka's voice went very careful. "Adaeze, don't. I'm not saying anything." "Good. I'm just sitting here being your best friend and not saying anything about the fact that you went in there to save a man and now he's catching you when you fall. Chimaka, I will hang up." "Very romantic," Chimaka said. She hung up. By week 3, Adaeze had enough to be concerned, but not enough to act. She had positioned herself to be the one to prepare Yeonsu's morning tea service 3 times a week, a schedule she had engineered through careful, patient maneuvering that would have made Chimaka simultaneously proud and horrified. She had begun documenting Yeonsu's patterns, the private cabinet in her dressing room that required a separate key, the small unmarked bottle that appeared in Park's tea service on specific mornings and not others. She photographed what she could. She stored everything behind the loose garden stone. She needed to see the contents of that bottle. She had a contact, a friend of Chimaka's who worked in pharmaceutical research in Busan. But getting the sample out of the estate without detection required timing, patience, and the kind of nerve that Adaeze Okonkwo had been building her entire life. What she had not factored into any of her calculations was an assassination attempt on a Wednesday afternoon. She was in the East Garden, ostensibly trimming something, actually watching the back gate where a delivery was expected, when she heard it. Not a loud sound, more of a controlled commotion from the direction of the garage, then shouting, then the sound that required no translation in any language. Gunshots. The first shot didn't come from the front. It never does with professionals. Adaeze was moving through the gap between the garage and the east wing when the service gate came off its hinges with a sound that was less explosion and more controlled certainty. 6 men. Tactical, deliberate. They had done this before and they knew exactly how much time they had before the estate's inner security responded. What they had not calculated was the woman standing between them and their target. 2 of Park's guards went down fast. One took something to the shoulder. The other hit the ground before he could reach his weapon. Park was backed against the wall, 1 against 3, and he was holding his own the way a man holds his own when he is genuinely dangerous. But the numbers were simply wrong. Adaeze assessed this in approximately 1 second. Then she moved. She came from the blind side, the angle none of the other men were watching, because why would they watch a housekeeper? And she hit the closest one with everything she had. No warning, no hesitation. She had grown up in places that taught you that the person who announces themselves first loses. She had never forgotten that lesson. Her elbow connected with the side of his neck, and he went sideways, and she was already moving to the next one before the first hit the ground. The second man was bigger and he turned fast, grabbed her arm. She let him, used his grip and his momentum and the half-second of confidence that came with his size against him, twisted in a direction he wasn't expecting, and introduced his face to the estate wall with a force that left a mark on both. He dropped. The third one had a knife. Adaeze picked up the garden tool. What happened next lasted maybe 40 seconds and was not something that would ever appear in a choreographed film sequence. It was ugly and close and brutally efficient. The kind of fighting that comes not from training, but from years of understanding exactly how much damage a human body can absorb and exactly where it cannot. She took a cut across her forearm that she didn't acknowledge. She gave back considerably more than she received. And when Park's inner security finally poured into the garden, the situation was already resolved. Adaeze was standing in the middle of it, garden tool in hand, breathing normally, a cut on her forearm bleeding quietly onto her uniform sleeve. She looked at the damage around her, looked at the tool in her hand, set it down. Then she looked at Park Jae-won. He was looking at her with an expression that had completely abandoned any pretense of composure. Not fear, not confusion. Something that was trying to locate a category for what it had just witnessed and finding that no existing category was adequate. Adaeze straightened her uniform collar with her uninjured hand. "Should I finish the East Wing linens?" she asked, "or is that no longer a priority?" Silence. One of the security team members made a sound that might have been a laugh. I immediately converted into a cough. Park stared at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "Come inside." His study was the kind of room that told you everything about a man without him saying a word. Clean lines, nothing unnecessary. Every object earning its place. Books that had actually been read. A desk that had seen real work. No performance of power. Just the quiet, settled confidence of someone who didn't need to prove anything to the room he sat in. Adaeze stood near the door while he spoke briefly to his head of security in Korean. She didn't follow. She waited with the patience of someone who had spent her life in rooms where she had to wait for men to finish before she could speak. It had never bothered her. Patience was just strategy with better posture. When the security team left and the door closed, Park turned and looked at her properly for the first time since the garden. He crossed the room, not to his desk, to her. For he stopped in front of her and looked down at her forearm, the sleeve dark with blood now, the cut longer than she'd thought, and his expression was controlled, but not entirely. He reached out and pushed the sleeve back carefully. Adaeze let him. She watched his face while he assessed it. "Sit," he said. "It's fine." He looked at her, just looked at her. Adaeze sat. He pulled his chair from behind the desk and sat directly in front of her, closer than professional distance, close enough that she was aware of exactly how close, and opened the first aid kit from the desk drawer with the efficiency of a man who had dealt with wounds before and had opinions about how they should be handled. He worked in silence. On his hands were steady and careful and thorough. The kind of thorough that paid attention to getting it right rather than getting it done. At one point, he pressed the wound closed with more pressure than she expected, and she didn't flinch. He glanced up briefly. Something moved through his eyes. He went back to what he was doing. When he finished, he didn't release her arm immediately. He held it, not tightly, not demanding anything. Just held it the way you hold something you're not ready to put down yet. He looked at what he had done. Then he looked up. This close, this quiet. You took a knife for me, he said. The knife was already moving, Adaeze said. I just redirected it. That's not a distinction that changes what it means, he said. Adaeze said nothing. His eyes moved over her face with that precision she had noticed before. The way he looked at things he was trying to understand. Like she was a problem his usual frameworks couldn't solve, and he found this less frustrating than interesting. Who are you, Adaeze Okonkwo? He said quietly. A businesswoman, she said, who grew up somewhere complicated. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. He held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he released her arm slowly and sat back. The professional distance returned, not coldly, just consciously, like a decision being made in real time. You'll have the rest of the day, he said. Don't use that arm. I have linens. Adaeze. Her name in his mouth without the formal title. It landed the same way it always would, like something that had weight. Rest, he said. She stood, smoothed her uniform sleeve, looked at him once more. He was already looking back. She left. She got exactly 4 steps down the corridor before she stopped, looked at the ceiling, and had a very firm internal conversation with herself about the current situation and what she was and was not going to do about it. The conversation was not entirely successful. He found her in the garden that evening, not accidentally, not passing through. He came with intention. She could tell by the way he moved toward her specifically, the way he stopped beside her specifically, the way he looked at her, like he had decided something before he got there. She was sitting on the bench near the east wall, the garden quiet around them, Busan doing something with the last of the evening light that made everything look temporarily still. He sat beside her, not close enough to be inappropriate, close enough that she was aware of exactly how close he was. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence was the comfortable kind. The kind that had been building between them since a corridor and a cut in hands that were gentler than they had any right to be. And then he reached out without asking and took her injured arm gently, looked at the bandage. Something had shifted at the edge from the day's work. He fixed it carefully, fingers precise and unhurried. The same hands that had dressed it that morning in his study. He didn't release her arm immediately when he finished. He looked at it for a moment, then at her. Then he said, I don't do this. Adaeze looked at him, her arm still in his hand. I don't sit in gardens. I don't. He stopped. Started again with the careful precision of a man who had thought about exactly what he wanted to say and was finding that the words were not behaving. I don't notice people, not like this. I notice threats. I notice problems. I notice things that need to be handled. A pause, his thumb moved slightly against her arm, just slightly. I notice you. The garden was very quiet. Mr. Park, she started, I'm not asking you for anything. He said it quickly, cleanly, like he needed her to know that before she responded. I'm not. This isn't a request. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who should know it. He looked at her directly. You should know it. Adaeze looked back at him, at this man who had just said something that had clearly cost him considerably and was now sitting with the composure of someone who had put something down and was not picking it up again. He held her gaze for a moment. Adaeze said nothing. She didn't need to. Then he looked back at the garden, the evening light shifting around them. He released her arm slowly. Neither of them said anything else. Neither of them needed to. The results came back in 4 days. The compound in Yun Su's bottle was not immediately lethal. It was slow. The kind of thing designed to look like declining health over months, eventually years. Untraceable without specific testing. Sophisticated enough that someone with significant resources had sourced it. Adaeze sat with that information for a full day. She sat with it and thought about Nari watching her father accept his tea every morning. She thought about a 6-year-old who had calculated that her father would never believe her, and so had simply accepted that something bad would happen someday, and decided that at least one person should know. She thought about how unbearable it was to be that child. Then she went to find Park Jae-won. He received her in his study. He was standing when she came in, jacket off, And it working. The first time she had seen him look anything approaching accessible. He looked at her with that same unreadable attention. Adaeze set the documentation on his desk. The photographs, the lab results, the dates and times she had recorded over 3 weeks. She laid it out the way she had laid out business proposals her entire life. Clearly, completely, without drama. Then she stepped back and waited. He went through it in silence, page by page. She watched his face and it remained composed for most of it. That closed-door expression that gave nothing away. Then he reached the lab results. He read them once, read them again. The silence in the room changed quality. "How long have you known?" he asked without looking up. 3 weeks. I needed enough to be certain before I brought it to you. Now he looked up. You've been here 3 weeks. Yes. You applied to this household 3 weeks ago. A pause. Yes. His eyes moved over her face with a precision that felt like being taken apart, component by component. You didn't come here as a housekeeper, he said. Not a question. Adaeze had known this moment was coming. She had prepared for it. She met his gaze directly and said, No, I didn't. Then why did you come? Adaeze thought of Nari at the gala. White dress, gold buttons, legs that didn't reach the floor. The weight in those small eyes. Your daughter told me at the gala, she said. She wasn't asking for help. She just needed someone to know. But I couldn't unknow it. The room was very quiet. Park set the documents down slowly. He looked at them for a long moment. And then he looked at Adaeze with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Something that had moved past the closed door entirely into somewhere much less protected. Nari told a stranger, he said quietly. More to himself than to her. She told me she tried to tell you, Adaeze said carefully, that you wouldn't believe her. Something crossed his face, sharp and brief. She didn't look away from it. She was right that I wouldn't have, he said. The admission seemed to cost him something. So Yeon-soo is... He stopped, started again. I believe she loved me. Adaeze said nothing. Some things didn't need a response. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he straightened. The composed expression came back, but it sat differently now, over something raw underneath. You'll need to leave the estate tonight, for your own safety. What happens next will not be, he paused, suitable for someone uninvolved. I understand, Adaeze said. She was almost at the door when he said, Miss Okonkwo. She turned. Thank you, he said. Simple, direct. The way a man says something when he means every syllable of it. Adaeze nodded once and left. She was packed within an hour. It was remarkable how quickly 3 weeks could fit back into a suitcase when you were efficient about it. She was moving through the corridor toward the staff exit when she heard small, fast footsteps behind her. She turned around. Nari, pajamas, hair loose, standing in the corridor, looking at Adaze's bag with an expression the child was working very hard to control, and losing ground rapidly. This was not the Nari of the gala. Not the Nari who had passed her in corridors for 3 weeks without a flicker of recognition. Not the strategic, composed, ancient-eyed child who left coded messages about garden stones. This was just a little girl watching someone she loved pack a bag. You're leaving, Nari said. I am, baby, Adaeze said. Something cracked open on Nari's face at that word. Just slightly. Just enough. Because of what you found? Because my work here is done. But, Nari stopped, started again. Does it have to be done? Adaeze crouched down to her level. Nari looked at her with eyes that were doing tremendous work trying not to be wet. You did something incredibly brave, Adaeze said softly. You saved your father's life, Nari. You did that. We did it, Nari said. Fierce. Immediate. Adaeze felt that in her chest like a physical thing. She opened her arms. Nari walked into them and held on with a ferocity that was completely disproportionate to her size. Arms locked, face pressed hard into Adaze's shoulder. Holding on the way, children hold on when they understand that letting go means it's real. Adaeze held her back. No rush, no gentle untangling. She let Nari hold on for as long as she needed. When the child finally stepped back, her eyes were bright but her chin was up. She smoothed her pajama top, gathered herself back into some approximation of her usual composure. She was 6 years old and she was heartbreaking. Will you call me? Nari asked. Yes, Adaeze said without hesitation. Promise? Nari Park, I promise. Nari nodded once, accepting it. Then she looked at Adaeze very seriously and said, You should know that my father walked into 7 rooms you were working in this week. I counted. Adaeze blinked. You counted. 7, Nari confirmed, in case that information is useful to you. Then she turned around and walked back toward her room with her chin still up and her small shoulders very straight. And Adaeze stood in that corridor holding her bag, feeling 7 different things simultaneously. She heard a sound, looked up. Park Jae-won was standing at the far end of the corridor. He had clearly been there for some of that. He looked at her across the distance, composed, contained. And then he looked at Nari's retreating back with an expression Adaeze had never seen on his face before. Something soft and wrecked and proud all at once. Then he looked back at Adaeze. And he said nothing. She said nothing. She walked to the exit. The airport was Nari's idea. Adaeze found out at 6 in the morning when Mrs. Yoon knocked on her hotel room door, alarming enough on its own, and informed her with the expression of someone delivering news they had not signed up for that a car was waiting downstairs. The car contained Nari in a coat over her school uniform, fully prepared to be late for school and apparently at complete peace with this decision. And Park Jae-won, who was in the passenger seat and turned to look at Adaeze when she got in with an expression that said he was also here against his better judgment and entirely because of a 6-year-old who had given him no viable alternative. She wanted to come, he said. I heard. I wanted to come, Nari corrected from beside Adaeze, sliding her small hand into Adaze's without preamble. Yes, there's a difference. The drive to the airport took 40 minutes. Nari talked for 38 of them. About her school, about a girl in her class named Ji-yu, who was irritating for reasons that were detailed and specific, about a book she was reading, about whether Adaeze had ever been to Jeju Island because apparently it was very beautiful, and Adaeze should go someday. She held Adaze's hand the entire time, and occasionally she would just stop talking mid-sentence and squeeze it, then continue. Park sat in the front and said very little, but twice Adaeze caught him watching them in the passenger mirror. He didn't look away when she caught him. At the airport, he walked them to the departure area, the furthest point he could go. Around them, Busan moved in its efficient morning rhythm. Flights being called, trolleys rolling, these people saying hello and goodbye in the continuous loop that airports run on. Nari had been fine in the car. She had been fine walking through the terminal. She had been very busy being fine. She stopped being fine approximately 4 meters from the departure gate. It was subtle at first, her steps slowing, her hand tightening around Adaze's. Then she stopped walking entirely. Adaeze stopped with her. Park stopped a step behind. Nari looked at the departure gate, looked at Adaeze, looked at the gate again. I don't want you to go, she said. No preamble, no composure wrapper around it. Just the plain, unguarded truth of a child who had run out of the energy required to be strategic about her feelings. I know, baby. Then why are you going? Because I have to. For now. For now, Nari repeated, testing the weight of those 2 words. Kuno, for now, Adaeze confirmed. Nari looked at her for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and wrapped both arms around Adaze's waist and pressed her face into her coat. And this time she didn't try to be composed about it at all. Her shoulders shook once, just once. Then she held on. Adaeze held her. She looked up over Nari's head. Park was watching them. His jaw was set. His hands were in his pockets. The composure was there, but it was doing considerable work. And Adaeze could see exactly what it was working against. He looked like a man who had something to say and had already decided he wasn't going to say it because he had said it once in a garden and she had given him no answer. And he was not a man who repeated himself. Adaeze looked at him. He looked back. The airport moved around them. She gently eased Nari back. Get crouched down. Nari's eyes were wet, but her chin was doing its best. I'm going to call you, Adaeze said. Tonight, the moment I land. You promised, Nari said. I promised. Nari wiped her face with the back of her hand, straightened, that extraordinary composure assembling itself again, piece by piece, even as Adaeze watched. Okay, she said quietly. Adaeze stood, looked at Park. He looked back. Thank you, she said, for the car. Thank Nari. His voice was even. His eyes were not. Adaeze nodded, pulled up her suitcase, turned toward the gate. Adaeze. She turned back. It was the second time he had used her name without the formal title. It landed differently than she was prepared for. He looked at her across the space between them. Around them, Busan hummed and rushed, and a flight to Lagos was beginning its final boarding call. Come back, he said. Quiet, simple, not asking exactly, not quite commanding either. Something in between that was entirely its own thing. Adaeze looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked through the gate. She did not let herself look back, but she was smiling. He didn't sleep that night. Adaeze had left the estate 2 hours ago. The house was quiet in the way houses go quiet after something significant has passed through them. Not empty exactly, just stilled. Park sat in his study with the documents on his desk. The photographs, the lab results, the dates and times recorded in Adaeze's careful handwriting over 3 weeks. He had read them once when she presented them. He read them again after she left, then a third time. Not because he didn't believe them, but because he was giving himself the time to feel what needed to be felt before he did what needed to be done. 3 years. He looked at the lab results, at the name of the compound, at the timeline. 4 months, he calculated quietly. The way he calculated everything. 4 months of mornings. 4 months of tea accepted from hands he had trusted completely. He thought about how far it would have gone if Adaeze hadn't come. How many more months before the damage became irreversible? Before the doctors started looking for explanations that Yeon-soo had already prepared answers for. He would have been sick, then sicker, then trusting the woman beside him to handle things while he couldn't. Handing her everything he had built, piece by piece, because he was too ill to hold it himself, and she was there, and he loved her. That had been the plan. He sat with that for a long time. Then he thought about Nari. He had seen it. He could admit that now, in the quiet of his study, with nobody watching. He had seen his daughter pull away from Yeon-soo in the first year, the way Nari went quiet around her. The way she stopped bringing her drawings to the dinner table when Yeon-soo was there. The way she chose to sit at the far end of rooms and watch with those ancient, careful eyes instead of participating. He had told himself it was adjustment. The children needed time. That Nari had been alone with him for so long that sharing his attention felt threatening. He had been patient about it the way he was patient about everything. Quietly, deliberately, giving it room to resolve itself. What he had never told anyone was that the proposal had been close. Very close. He had looked at Yeon-soo and seen someone graceful and steady and present. But he had been waiting for one specific thing. Not a feeling, not a moment, not the right setting. He had been waiting for Nari to choose her, because Nari's instincts had never been wrong. One, because Nari saw things that took adults years to understand. Because if something ever happened to him, and in his world, something always could, he needed to know that the woman he left his daughter with had been chosen by his daughter first. Nari never chose her. He had kept waiting. Give it more time. Give them more time. Nari will come around. Children adjust. And Yeon-soo, who had been patient for 3 years and had misread his deliberateness as hesitation, had decided 4 months ago to stop leaving things to chance. She didn't know she had already won. She had poisoned a man who was already going to say yes. He made one phone call, short, quiet, 3 sentences. He ended the call, put his phone down, and sat in the silence of his study for another hour. At midnight, he stood up, straightened his jacket. He walked down the corridor to her room. He knocked once. A pause, the sound of movement. The door opened. Yeon-soo stood in the doorway in her robe, hair loose. She looked at him with the warmth she had always had for him, genuine in its presentation, practiced in its architecture. 3 years of mornings and evenings and conversations in the particular intimacy of a shared life. He had looked at that warmth and believed it completely. He looked at it now and felt nothing but tired. "Come with me," he said. She followed him to his study without asking why. She sat across from his desk with the ease of a woman who had sat there many times before, comfortable, unguarded. She had no reason yet to be anything else. Then she saw the documents. Her eyes moved over them. The photographs first. Her hands, the bottle, the tea service. With dates and times she recognized because she had been there for all of them. Then the lab results. Then Adase's handwriting recording 3 weeks of careful observation. He watched her face while she read. He watched the warmth arrange itself into something else, something that was still composed. She was always composed. It was one of the things he had admired about her. But underneath the composition, something had shifted. The confidence of a woman who had walked in believing she could manage whatever this was, meeting the reality of documents that left nothing to manage. She looked up. What was underneath it was not guilt. It was frustration. The frustration of a plan 3 years in the making, undone by a 6-year-old and a woman who had come to Busan to sell gemstones. He stood by the window with his back to her. Busan outside is to the city doing its midnight things, completely indifferent to what was happening in this room. Tell me why, he said. Not I know what you did. Not how could you. Just tell me why. The simplest question, the one that gave her the chance to say something real for the first time since she had walked into his life. The room was very quiet. She said nothing. He waited. He was a patient man when patience was required. Still nothing. He turned from the window, looked at her across the room, at this woman he had brought into his house, into Nari's life, into his bed, at the hands that had prepared his tea every morning with such practiced care, at the face he had woken up next to for 3 years, believing he was looking at his future, who had looked at everything he had built and seen not a life, but an inventory. She looked at him for a long moment. You were taking too long, she said, simply, flatly, the composed voice of a woman who had run out of reasons to perform. I had given 3 years. I had positioned myself. I had done everything correctly, and you kept waiting and waiting, and I didn't know what you were waiting for. I thought, she stopped. I thought you were never going to choose me, that you were keeping me close without intention, that I was going to lose everything I had worked for. She looked at the documents. So I decided to make sure that even if you didn't choose me, you would still need me. Park said nothing. He looked at her across the room, at this woman who had constructed an entire plan around an assumption that was wrong from the very beginning. I was going to propose, he said quietly. She looked up. Something crossed her face, sharp and immediate and entirely genuine. The first genuine thing he had seen from her tonight. Not guilt, not remorse, something rarer than either. The expression of a person receiving information that arrives 4 months too late to change anything. I was waiting for Nari, he said. I needed her to choose you first, because my daughter comes before everything, before the organization, before what I want, before anything. If something ever happened to me, I needed to know she was safe with you. He looked at her directly. I was still waiting. I was still giving it time. I was 2 steps away from saying yes. The room was completely still. Yeon-soo looked at him, at the documents, at the window behind him, at everything she had nearly had. She never chose me, Yeon-soo said, very quietly, almost to herself. No, Park said, she didn't. I tried. Not hard enough, he said simply, without cruelty, just fact. Nari is not difficult to love. She never has been. She just needed someone to choose her first before she chose them back. You were always waiting for her to come to you. She was always waiting for you to come to her. Nobody came. Yeon-soo looked at him for a long moment. Something was happening on her face that had nothing to do with composure or strategy. The full weight of it arriving all at once. 3 years, 4 months. A plan built on a wrong assumption. A proposal that was already coming. A child who just needed to be chosen first. All of it. Gone for nothing. I didn't want you to die, she said, and her voice for the first time had something real in it. Not love. Not guilt exactly. Just the exhausted honesty of someone who has run out of everything else. I just wanted it to be enough. Everything I did, I wanted it to be enough for you to choose me. It was enough, he said quietly. You were enough. I just needed more time. She looked at him. He looked back. And in that moment, in the terrible quiet of his study at midnight, they both understood something that couldn't be undone. That somewhere in the space between his patience and her fear, something real had existed once. Something that could have been chosen properly if either of them had known what the other was waiting for. It was the saddest thing in the room, and it changed nothing. "You can go now," he said. His voice was quiet, completely even. No anger, no performance. It's just the absolute finality of a man who had made his decision before he knocked on her door, and had come himself instead of sending someone, because he had loved her once, and she deserved to hear the truth from him directly, even if the truth arrived too late for either of them to do anything with it. The door opened behind her. Two men standing at attention, waiting. Yeonsu looked at them, looked back at Park, standing at his window with his back already half turned. She understood what go meant tonight. There was no negotiation, no scene, no version of this that ended differently. She stood up slowly, smoothed her robe, the composure returning one final time. Not for him, not for the situation, just because it was the only thing she had left that was entirely hers. She looked at him one more time. He had already turned back to the window. She went. The door closed. Park Jae-won stood at the window of his study alone. Busan outside. The documents on his desk behind him. The quiet of a house that had just become smaller and cleaner and emptier all at once. He thought about 3 years. About what he had believed and what had been real, and the distance between those two things. He thought about Nari going quiet at dinner tables, Nari choosing the far end of rooms, Nari watching with those ancient, careful eyes and seeing something he had refused to find. He thought about a 6-year-old who had crossed a gala floor and whispered a secret to a stranger because she had run out of every other option. She had saved his life twice, once by never choosing Yeonsu, once by choosing Adaeze. He stood at that window until the sky outside began to change, until Busan shifted from night into the gray that comes before morning, until the documents were just paper, and the decision was just a decision, and the house was just a house waiting to become something else. Then he sat down at his desk, and when Mrs. Yoon brought his tea at 7 in the morning, setting it down beside him with her usual efficiency and her usual silence, he picked it up and drank it. And for the first time in 4 months, it tasted like nothing but tea. She called Nari at 11 that night, Lagos time, which was 6 in the morning, Busan time, which meant Nari had been awake waiting, which Nari denied with transparent unconvincingness. "I wasn't waiting," Nari said. "Of course not," Adaeze said. "I just happened to be awake at 6 in the morning. I'm a morning person." "I may have set an alarm," Nari admitted. Adaeze laughed, warm and genuine, filling her Lagos apartment with a sound that felt like it belonged somewhere else too. "How's your father?" A small pause. "He had dinner alone. He does that sometimes, but tonight he was looking at his phone a lot." "Probably work," Adaeze said. "Probably," Nari said, in a tone that indicated she did not believe this for 1 second. They talked for an hour, about Lagos, which Nari had questions about, specific and research questions that suggested she had spent some portion of her day doing independent investigation into West African geography. About Nari's school and the ongoing situation with Jiu, about gemstones. Nari wanted to know how the business worked, and Adaeze explained it, and Nari listened with the focused attention of someone filing information for future use. Before they hung up, Nari said, casually, as though it were an afterthought, "My father wants to know if you arrived safely." "You can tell him I did," Adaeze said. "You could tell him yourself. I could give you his number." Silence. "Nari Park," Adaeze said. "I'm just saying it's available," Nari said innocently. "Good night, Nari." "Good night, Adaeze. I'll tell him you said you arrived safely." The call ended. Adaeze sat in her apartment smiling at her phone. 3 minutes later, a message arrived from an unknown Busan number. "Glad you arrived safely." Adaeze stared at it, looked at the ceiling, looked back at it. She typed back, "Your daughter gave you up immediately." The reply came fast. She was supposed to be subtle. "She's 6. She's usually better than this." Adaeze smiled, set the phone down, picked it up again. "How are you?" she typed. A longer pause this time, quieter than I expected. She read that twice, set the phone down again, picked it up. "Nari says you looked at your phone a lot at dinner. I'm going to have a conversation with Nari about intelligence gathering protocols." Adaeze laughed out loud in her empty apartment. She typed back, "She's gifted. Don't discourage it. Another pause. She asked me tonight if Lagos is far. Adaze's hands went still over her phone. What did you tell her? She typed. I told her it depends on whether you want to get there. Adaeze sat with that for a long time. Outside her window, Lagos was doing what Lagos always did. Loud and alive and entirely itself. She had built her life in this city. She knew every sound of it. It had never once felt small to her. Tonight it felt like it had edges. She typed. She mentioned Jeju Island in the car, said it's beautiful. It is. Have you taken her? Not yet. She has a list of places she wants to go. Does the list include Lagos? The pause before his reply was the longest yet. It does now. The video calls became a thing, not formally established, not discussed or arranged. They simply began happening. When Nari, calling on schedule with the reliability of a 6-year-old who had decided this was now a fixture of her life. She called from her bedroom, from the estate garden, once memorably from underneath her school desk, during what she described as a very boring lesson that she felt confident Adaeze would agree did not require her full attention. Adaeze had covered her mouth with her hand and shaken with silent laughter, while Nari explained in a whisper why ancient Korean history, as taught by her current teacher, was a crime against the concept of interesting. Park appeared on the calls sometimes, not always, but sometimes Nari would wander into a room where he was and not wander back out. And gradually he would become visible in the background, working, reading, and occasionally looking up at the screen with that composed attention that Adaeze was learning to read more fluently than she had ever intended to. Chiamaka had opinions about all of this. You have a standing video call schedule with a Korean crime family, Chiamaka said one evening, appearing uninvited in Adaeze's office doorway. I have a standing call with Nari, and her father just happens to be there. He lives there, Chiamaka. Adaeze. Chiamaka tilted her head. You're glowing. I'm working. You were glowing while working. A pause. You're going back, aren't you? Adaeze said nothing. You've already bought the ticket, Chiamaka said. Longer silence. I knew it. I knew it from the moment you called me from that gala asking about domestic staffing agencies. She shook her head. Yasu, I want full credit for being the best friend who did not let you die in a Busan crime estate. You were extremely unhelpful. I found the agency under protest. I'm still a hero. Chiamaka folded her arms. And I want to be a bridesmaid. Get out of my office. Chiamaka left. Adaeze looked back at her screen. A flight itinerary was open in the tab behind her work documents. Busan, 4 weeks from now. She hadn't confirmed it yet. She opened the tab, read it over once, thought about a garden at dusk and one quiet word, and a man who didn't repeat himself but had said it anyway. She thought about a little girl who had set an alarm for 6 in the morning and pretended she hadn't. She clicked at confirm. She told Nari on their next call. She had planned to be casual about it, mention it in passing, keep it simple. I manage the 6-year-old's expectations carefully. She said, I'm coming to visit in 4 weeks. And Nari screamed. Not a frightened scream, a pure, unguarded, completely undignified scream of joy that brought Park through the door in approximately 2 seconds with an expression of sharp, alert readiness that collapsed into something between relief and bewilderment when he saw Nari jumping on her bed. Adaeze is coming! Adaeze is coming! Adaeze is coming! Nari, 4 weeks, I heard. He looked at the screen, at Adaeze trying not to laugh. Something moved through his face, warm and involuntary, gone almost before it arrived. Almost. 4 weeks, he said. 4 weeks, Adaeze confirmed. They looked at each other through a screen between Lagos and Busan, while Nari bounced on the bed behind him, chanting Adaeze's name like a victory song. I'll have the guest room prepared, he said. Thank you. A pause. Nari has already planned an itinerary for your visit. Of course she has. It's 12 pages. Adaeze pressed her lips together. 12? She's thorough, he said. And there it was again. That involuntary warmth, quiet and genuine. The softness underneath that she suspected very few people in his world ever got close enough to see. Adaeze looked at this man through a screen across continents and felt, with complete clarity, the things she had been not quite naming since a corridor and a cut in hands that were gentler than they had any right to be. She said yes. 4 weeks isn't very long. He held her gaze. No, he said, it isn't. Neither of them said what that meant. Neither of them needed to. Behind him, Nari had stopped bouncing and was now watching the screen with the quiet attention of a child who understood considerably more than anyone gave her credit for. She caught Adaeze's eye through the screen and smiled. That rare, sudden, transformative smile. Adaeze smiled back. 4 weeks. It wasn't very long at all. But then again, it had only taken Nari 4 minutes at a gala to change everything. Adaeze had learned not to underestimate short amounts of time. It was past midnight Lagos time when her phone rang. Not Nari's number. The other Busan number. Adaeze stared at it for 2 rings. Picked up. You're awake, Park said. You're calling. A pause. The kind that had something in it. I couldn't sleep. Adaeze sat up slowly. Outside, Lagos was doing its midnight things. She said nothing and let him find his way to whatever had made him dial her directly tonight instead of letting Nari be the bridge the way he usually did. How are you? He asked. Simple question, not simple delivery. I'm good. Made dinner tonight. Silence. Who is Amika? Park said. Not a question. A sentence that had arrived already fully assembled. A friend, Adaeze said. A friend, he repeated. He cooks very well, actually. He made jollof rice. And is there a man in your life? Park asked. Adaeze paused just long enough. Yes, she said. The silence that followed was not comfortable. What's his full name? Park said. Not are you serious? Not oh, I see. Not anything reasonable. Just that immediate flat what's his name. Like he was already collecting information. Emeka, Adaeze said, watching where this was going. He repeated it slowly, like he was filing it somewhere. How long? How long what? How long have you been with him? His voice was even, completely even, which was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. Adaeze had spent enough time around this man to understand that his stillness was never emptiness. It was pressure with nowhere to go yet. A while, she said. A while, he repeated. Then nothing, just breathing. She could feel him on the other end of the phone, and not saying the thing he was thinking, and the thing he was thinking was loud. Is he there? No, but he comes there. His voice was still even, still controlled, but something underneath it now. Something that had claws. I need to know if there is a man walking into your house, cooking in your kitchen, sitting where I haven't sat yet. I need to know that. Adaeze stared at her wall. That's not a reasonable thing to need to know, she said carefully. I know, he said. I know it isn't. I know I have no right to it. I know you owe me nothing, and I have given you no reason to. He stopped. When he came back, his voice was lower, rougher. I called you at midnight, Adaeze, on a Friday, because I couldn't be in this house 1 more hour without hearing your voice. That's where I am. That's what you've done to me. I don't know what to do with that. Adaeze said nothing. I don't share, he said quietly. I want you to know that. However this sounds, however unreasonable, I don't share and I don't wait well, and I am aware that I am not being rational right now. But I called you at midnight on a Friday, so rationality has clearly already left the building? J1, I'm coming to Lagos. Adaeze blinked. What? 4 weeks is too long for me to wait. I'll come to Lagos. You can't just... I travel for business regularly. Lagos is a viable destination. You don't have business in Lagos. I could find some, he said, completely calm, completely serious. I'm resourceful. Adaeze stared at her wall. Park J1. Yes, you would fly to Lagos. If necessary, he said. Yes, because of several reasons. I think you already know them. Tell me there's no one, he said. Low, direct, almost desperate underneath the control. Just tell me. Emeka is 12 years old, Adaeze said. Silence. He's my neighbor's son. He came to pay a visit and stayed 45 minutes talking about football. Here is no boyfriend. The exhale that came through the phone was long and completely unguarded, the sound of a man putting down something very heavy. 12, he said. 12, Adaeze confirmed. Another silence, then quieter. I was about to fly to Lagos. I know you were. Tonight. I know. That would have been insane. Yes, he agreed, then quieter still. I still want to. Adaeze pressed her hand over her mouth. A pause, then she said quietly, What happened to Yeon-soo? The woman from the gala? Hey, what did you think you had? The silence on his end changed texture entirely. She's gone, he said. I know she's gone, Adaeze said gently. I'm asking what happened. How you met her. What you thought you had. A long pause, she could feel him deciding. 3 years ago, he said finally. A charity event. She was everything that looked right from the outside. Graceful, patient. She was good with Nari at the beginning. His voice shifted, flattened slightly. Nari stopped trusting her within 6 months. I told myself it was jealousy. It wasn't. It was a child seeing clearly what I refused to see. A pause. I loved her, or I loved what I thought she was. By the time I understood those were different things, he stopped. You know how that ended. I do, Adaeze said softly. Silence settled between them, comfortable this time. The kind that didn't need filling. I looked up Lagos today, he said. Adaeze blinked. What? The city, the distance, the flight. A pause. I've looked it up 4 times this week, in case you decide not to come back, in case you think distance is a solution. Another pause. I want you to know that it isn't. 21 hours is nothing. I want you to know that before you make any decisions about running. I'm not running, she said quietly. Good. Then lower. Come back earlier. Not for Nari. For me. Come back for me. I don't like this distance. I don't like not knowing if you've eaten. I don't like that someone else is in the same city as you and I'm not. I don't like any of it. Jae-won, Adaeze said softly. I know, he said. I know how that sounds. It sounds like you're in trouble, she said. A long pause. And yes, he said simply. I am. Adaeze looked at her ceiling, at the flight itinerary still open on her laptop from earlier that evening. Busan, 4 weeks from now. Good night, Jae-won, she said. A pause, like he didn't want to be the one to end it. Good night, Adaeze, he said finally. She hung up, sat in the quiet for a long moment. Then she turned her laptop, pulled up her flight confirmation. 4 weeks staring back at her. She changed it to 10 days, closed the laptop, smiled at her ceiling. Chiamaka was going to have opinions about this. She didn't care even a little bit. And somewhere in Busan, a man who had looked up Lagos 4 times that week was still awake, staring at his phone, at her name on his screen, at the quiet of a house that had started feeling different the moment she left it. Some stories change you before you even realize they've started.